Here's a repetition of the provided information. For decades, the U.S. government has withheld critical information about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But in 2025, following a directive, over 80,000 pages of previously classified documents were finally released. What do they reveal? Did the CIA know more than they admitted? Was there a deeper conspiracy? Let's break it all down. Section 1. The CIA and Oswald, what they knew and when they knew it. Oswald was under CIA surveillance weeks before the assassination. Newly unredacted files confirm the agency closely monitored his Mexico City trip in September to October 1963. He visited the Soviet and Cuban embassies, attempting to secure a visa. The CIA wiretapped his calls, including one where he spoke to a KGB officer. Yet, this intelligence was never shared with the FBI or other agencies, raising questions about whether the assassination could have been prevented. Section 2. The CIA's secret war and Oswald's role. The CIA was heavily involved in anti-Castro operations, arming and training Cuban exiles. Documents confirm that many operatives had ties to organized crime and intelligence networks. Was Oswald working with or against these interests? Some files suggest Oswald may have been involved with multiple intelligence assets, including U.S. and foreign agencies. A missing document, believed to be the testimony of former CIA counterintelligence chief James Angleton, could have shed light on these connections but remains unaccounted for. Section 3. The FBI's mysterious 2,400 newly found files. The FBI discovered 2,400 overlooked files related to JFK's assassination in early 2025. Many deal with Oswald's movements and potential contacts. These documents, many from the 124XXXXXXXXX series, discuss newly uncovered surveillance logs and eyewitness testimonies from Dallas. So far, no smoking gun has been found, but researchers believe these files could confirm deeper agency involvement in shaping the post-assassination narrative. Section 4. The CIA's propaganda machine. Declassified files reveal the CIA engaged in propaganda efforts to push the lone gunman theory and discredit alternative narratives. The agency worked closely with major news outlets to ensure their version of events became the accepted truth. This raises a crucial question. Was the Warren Commission an honest investigation, or was it designed to protect intelligence operations? Section 5. Israel, nuclear weapons, and JFK's opposition. The files contain multiple CIA requests to redact any mention of in JFK-related documents. What were they hiding? Some speculate it was JFK's staunch opposition to nuclear weapons program at Dimona. After JFK's death, U.S. policy toward Israel changed drastically, allowing the country to develop nuclear weapons unchecked. Section 6. The role of Lyndon B. Johnson. One of Oswald's secret letters suggests LBJ was part of an unnamed group manipulating U.S. foreign policy. LBJ's presidency was marked by unprecedented cooperation with intelligence agencies and redactions, raising suspicions about whether he benefited from JFK's assassination. Conclusion: the truth is still out there. The 2025 JFK Files release sheds light on intelligence failures, propaganda efforts, and global power struggles, but does not definitively solve the mystery of who orchestrated JFK's assassination. What we do know is that multiple powerful interests benefited from his death: the CIA, the military-industrial complex, organized crime, and foreign governments. Is this the final word on JFK, or are there still hidden documents waiting to be uncovered? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Part 3.
Okay, so we're diving in today to, you've sent me this just absolutely huge collection of stuff about the JFK assassination. I mean, we're talking over 6 million pages of records at the National Archives.
Right.
And, obviously a lot of people spend a lot of time with this material.
Mm-hmm.
But our goal today is to kind of try to pull out, what are the core findings? What are we really sure about? What are the big mysteries that are still out there?
Right.
And what does all this information really tell us about this event that I think, still fascinates people?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so interesting right away is just the effort to document this.
Yeah.
You've pointed to this, the President John F. Kennedy assassination records collection at the National Archives.
Right.
And that collection is a result of a law that Congress passed in 1992
Yeah.
that said, okay, all this material needs to be released. You know, we need to get this out there. So
Yeah.
you've got that. Then we're also looking at the Warren Commission report, which was that initial investigation that President Johnson put together. And then much later, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, or HSCA,
Right.
which, as we'll get into, kind of came to some different conclusions than the Warren Commission.
And this is still ongoing, right? I mean, with the recent executive order from this year in 2025, there are still records being declassified.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is a process that never really seems to end.
Yeah.
You know, we keep getting more and more information, even a real-time account from a ticker tape on that day.
Yeah, and this is where I think things get really interesting for me, because that day, November 22, 1963, everything happened so fast.
Yeah, it did.
You know, Kennedy arrives in Dallas.
Yeah.
The motorcade's going through Dealey Plaza.
Right.
And then sometime around 12:30 p.m. Central Time, you know, shots rang out.
Right.
And we actually have a snapshot of that moment from the ticker tape, which says, President Kennedy was shot.
Wow.
Mrs. Kennedy jumped up. She cried. Yo-mo! It's so stark to read that.
Yeah, it really puts you there. Yeah.
Governor Connolly was also shot in the car. And then, tragically, Kennedy dies at Parkland Memorial. Later that day, Johnson's sworn in on Air Force One.
Right.
And, you know, a big piece of this is that really just like a little over an hour after the shooting, Lee Harvey Oswald's arrested.
Right.
And soon after that, he's identified as the killer of Officer J.D. Tippit.
Right, a Dallas police officer.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, you know, you have this like really compressed timeline of events.
Yeah.
And then layered on top of that, you've got these two major investigations trying to make sense of it all.
Right.
So the first of those was the Warren Commission. And they concluded that Oswald acted alone.
Right.
That he fired 3 bullets from the Texas School Book Depository.
Yeah, and this is where that like super controversial magic bullet theory comes in.
Yeah.
Like the idea that one bullet could have caused wounds to both Kennedy and Connolly.
Yeah, and a lot of people have a lot of questions about that.
Right.
But, you know, fast forward to the HSCA investigation. Right.
And they actually came to a very different conclusion.
Yeah.
Their conclusion was that it was probably the case that Kennedy was assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. And part of the evidence that they looked at was scientific acoustical evidence, suggesting that there was more than one gunman.
So they're saying 2 shooters.
Yeah, at least 2, that there was probably a second shooter.
Okay.
Now, it's really important to highlight that while the HSCA said, okay, there's probably this conspiracy, they couldn't really identify who that second gunman would have been.
Right.
They couldn't identify the full scope of the conspiracy, and they very specifically cleared the Soviet Union, the Cuban government, the CIA, the FBI as organizations.
Right.
So it's a nuanced finding.
Yeah. And of course, Oswald's story is like, you can't really talk about this without talking about Oswald.
Absolutely central.
Yeah. So we know he worked at the Texas School Book Depository.
Right. The building where the shots are believed to have come from.
Exactly. He owned the rifle that was found there.
Yeah. The Mannlicher Carcano. Right. And then you have his background, which is, you know, a former Marine with Marxist leanings. He defects to the Soviet Union for a while. And then just weeks before the assassination, he's visiting the Soviet and Cuban embassies in Mexico City.
Right. Which raises all sorts of questions.
Yeah. And then, of course, 2 days after the assassination, he himself is killed by Jack Ruby.
Right. Jack Ruby, this Dallas nightclub owner.
Yeah.
Who said that his motive was to spare Jackie Kennedy from having to go through a trial.
Right.
Very strange twist.
Yeah, and so, you know, it's not surprising that with all these details, people are still arguing about this.
Absolutely.
Like, you flagged some of the really key points of contention.
Yeah. Well, you think about the physics of that magic bullet theory. Right. Like, a lot of people just don't buy it. You've got conflicting accounts from eyewitnesses about how many shots they heard, where the shots came from. People have pointed to inconsistencies in the medical evidence and the autopsy reports. And then there are these lingering suspicions that some evidence has been suppressed, that we don't have the full story. And of course, a big question is, you know, what did the CIA know about Oswald before the assassination?
Yeah, so it's understandable that a lot of people have turned to conspiracy theories.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's such a fertile ground for that.
Right. And it's amazing to me how consistently over time, a large portion of the American public has just not believed.
Yeah.
The idea that Oswald acted alone.
And you can see why, right? I mean, there are these loose ends. There are these questions.
Yeah.
And the declassification of records that's been happening, you know, for decades now. It's shed light on some things, for example.
Yeah.
We now know for sure that Oswald did visit those embassies.
Right.
We've learned that intelligence agencies were keeping tabs on him to some extent.
Right.
We've seen examples where information was withheld or where there seemed to have been intelligence failures. But as we both know, these releases haven't produced like a smoking gun.
Right.
That proves a grand conspiracy beyond a doubt.
So I guess for someone listening to us now and trying to, get a grasp on this incredibly complicated and frankly tragic event.
Yeah.
What do you think it all really comes down to?
Well, I think it comes down to this. We have this awful event, this tragedy, and then we have these official investigations that came to different conclusions.
Right.
And then just this massive volume of records.
Yeah.
And despite all of those records, there are still these fundamental questions that remain that people are still debating.
Yeah. And that makes me wonder, like, with millions of documents examined, why are we still arguing about this?
Right.
What does it say about, finding the truth about history, especially such a momentous event?
And I think that's a question that each listener really has to grapple with themselves.
Right.
I mean, with everything we know now.
Yeah.
And knowing that the HSCA did conclude that there was probably a conspiracy, but that they couldn't identify the specifics.
Right.
What kind of evidence would it take
Yeah.
to really change our understanding of this event?
There's something to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this has been a really fascinating dive into some very, very complex material.
It really has.
So I want to thank you for helping us navigate all of this.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.